Hi there. Drug and substance abuse has been looked down upon and villainized for quite a long time, the war on drugs of the 70s being a prime example of this. Over time, people have become more open minded about certain substances and campaigned for either the legalization or broader legalization of them. Examples include alcohol from the Prohibition era of the 1920s to marijuana over the last few decades after being mischaracterized and villainized, mostly due to the war on drugs, and as recently as psychedelic and street drugs like cocaine and LSD, which will soon become legalized in Oregon after a measure being passed in the 2020 election as of around 2 weeks ago. This sway in public opinion shows us that we should take this further and continue to remove false notions about drug and substance abuse. While we're at it, why not test the limits of human tolerance and addiction? We can do this by requiring every U.S. citizen over the age of 21 to try alcohol, marijuana, and cocaine at least one time. Hello, and my name is Alex Foster, and I will now explain how we are going to implement a measure some might see as very radical and very out there. To implement something like this, we would want to start removing the stigma through things like media campaigns and public outcry, public outreach. We want to get the message out there that certain substances like alcohol, marijuana, even to some extent cocaine, are not something we should be afraid of. They are something we should be open-minded to, and that some people enjoy using these substances, and that if anything, they can be helpful to some people. Now, the next step would be to test people's tolerance of these substances once we get to the point of having people try them. Now, we don't want to be too insane and have people try them all in one short amount of time. We would want to go for one at a time. Now, after people turn 21, we would want them to set up a time and place to try one substance at a time. So over the course of that year, they would try alcohol, marijuana, and cocaine. There would be at least a 1 month gap between each of them, so that everyone can fully recover if need be, or longer if complications arise. For trying these substances, we'd most likely just freely give them a certain amount of the substance and have them try them in different amounts. Our goal is to test how tolerant the human body can be to these substances and what limits we each have as a person. Everyone has different individual limits when it comes to different substances. Myself, I have a relatively medium alcohol tolerance, but that changes number one, due to the person, and number two, due to overall exposure. If you're exposed to a substance over a longer period of time, you are going to grow a higher tolerance to it. Take caffeine. I used to have a much lower tolerance to caffeine, and now I have a much higher tolerance because I have consumed so much of it over my life. Now, we would have someone on standby to help you if necessary and to test and record what sort of reactions or responses you have to each level of the drugs or alcohol. So, for example, in drinking alcohol, we would give you we would give you different types of alcohol. So we might start with a beer, just a simple like one beer, see how that goes for you. Then we move on to, say, a shot of something, a hard liquor like vodka, tequila, gin, something like that. And then we would move on after a short break to just taking progressively more shots to test different levels of how you're affected by the alcohol. So how balanced are you? How focused are you? Is your memory still intact? Are your inhibitions lowered at all? Over time, these things are going to be affected, but it's just a matter of seeking how long does it take for each person to reach that. For some, it might only take one shot. For some, it may take 5 or 6. This is very good research, but it also is very good for each individual person to know their own limits so that they do not surpass their limits and get into very bad situations. For marijuana and cocaine, we would do them in very similar style. You would try one small portion of the drug at a time until you got to the point of not being able to effectively function and understanding at what levels you are still able to function safely and effectively. Prior to this, we would do health and psychological screenings to determine if what, the person can even handle the drugs at all. For cocaine specifically, a health screening is very, very vital because cocaine can be very problematic for people with underlying health problems such as a heart condition. Not everyone is aware of certain health conditions until they are much older as an adult. For heart problems, you might not become aware of it until it becomes a life-threatening problem. So we would try to do the best of our abilities, screen you to determine if it is even safe to do this at all. This goes with psychological screenings. We can test to see how likely it is for you to become addicted to something at a relatively short amount of time. This can usually be shown for personality traits or past and present habits. And through one or both of these screenings, we would determine whether or not you should take the drugs, and if not, we would simply just exempt you from needing to take them at all. Now, some might look at this and think, well, what are the real benefits of this? Well, changing public perception of drug and alcohol use is just a benefit in and of itself. But everyone also learns the limits to which they can handle different substances and how functional they are at different levels of use. It could open up a whole new world that we could live in where people could be at different levels of, say, a different level of a high or a different level of drunkenness and still function regularly and still live a normal life. Another very important thing this could lead to is a decriminalization of certain substances if they are still illegal or looked down upon, and negate current prison sentences as well as prevent future incarcerations, which I think is something we should really strive for. Now, cons of this could obviously just be the weakened perception of the U.S.'s stance on drugs, despite only these three being permitted as a one-time policy for adults versus more dangerous drugs such as like heroin. Another drawback to this is simply going back to the health screenings and the negative health and psychological effects these drugs can have on this. Because if the screening is not successful, people will be hurt and potentially die. To conclude this may seem like a risk not worth taking, but I'd argue the benefits outweigh the costs, and we should take a stance and push for more public support for drug use.